Okay, so we're continuing our study of the Sermon on the Mount, attitudes of being based on the Beattitudes, which are 8 statements that begin the Sermon on the Mount, chapters 5, 6, and 7 of the Gospel according to Matthew. And the Beatitudes are verses 3 through 10 that form a table of context, if you will, that the rest of the sermon relates to in reverse order. It's kind of interesting how that works. I think Matthew had an interesting sense of humor. Or Jesus and Matthew working together. I'm not sure how that all came together. And calling this attitudes of being. And we started talking about the concept of being and this whole framework of how the Sermon on the Mount and how that fits in the Gospels. It's really the primary teachings of Jesus. And that the first beatitude, being open, poor in spirit, is being open. It's recognizing our unity, a consciousness of oneness. And that being the second beatitude of mourning has to do with being free, letting go, releasing, creating clarity of consciousness. The third beatitude, blessed are the meek. And this is in our relationship to God. Being poor in spirit has to do with our relationship with others. Being an open, receptive to other people and not feeling ourselves better than or worse than. And being meek is being non-resistant to our good, non-resistant to God, because God is good. And then we have the fourth beatitude, hungering and thirsting for righteousness, the right use of our consciousness, right thinking, affirmation, building a positive growth consciousness. And then we talked about the Lord's Prayer, which gets in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. After we talk about hunger and thirsting for righteousness, the right use of our consciousness, we get taught how to pray. And so we had a couple sessions on understanding the Lord's Prayer and creating a life of prayer. Then we started back in the fifth beatitude, blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. And this is the only beatitude where the quality received is the quality given. And it's the statement of the law of consciousness, the law of life. As we give, so shall we receive. The law of mind, action, thoughts held in mind, produce after their kind. All these great laws revolve around this. It's the law of consciousness. Then we talked about being pure in heart, as being faith-filled, having consciousness of God alone. Being pure in heart is the heart being the center, and being pure means releasing any distractions, the awareness of love's presence, the awareness of God. And then last time we talked about blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. And this has to do with being peace, realization of the fulfillment of the law, that peace passes all understanding. In other words, peace is not the absence of conflict. It's not the absence of disharmony. It's not the absence of struggling and striving with other people, places, and things. But it's a consciousness that we live in or come from in the midst of all of that. And then now we're in the eighth beatitude. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So the question comes up pretty quick. What's so blessed about being persecuted? And the other, blessed, the Beatitudes come from the word beati, which in Latin can mean blessed. It can also mean happy, fulfilled, content. Being persecuted is not necessarily something to be happy about, it would seem to me. But Emmett Fox, in his book Sermon on the Mount, gets right to the point. He says, in the view of what we know about the essential character of the teaching of Jesus, that the will of God for us is harmony, peace, and joy, and that these things are to be attained by cultivating right thoughts or righteousness. So he gets right back to that righteousness idea, that's right thoughts. That this is a very startling statement. It is a startling statement to think that we would be persecuted for righteousness' sake or for our right thinking. And what he goes on to say that Jesus tells us again and again that it is our Father's good pleasure to give us the kingdom, and that the way in which we are to receive it is by cultivating serenity or peace of soul. A little later he goes on to say that all this is indeed startling, it's perfectly correct, only we have to understand that the source of all this persecution is none other than our own selves. So we're not talking about persecution from the outside. There's nothing blessed or about being persecuted by other people, although that sometimes happens in the sense of people not understanding where we're coming from, especially family members or friends who don't like the changes because they like living in their negativity, or they like living in their, their own pity pot, self-pity, and all of a sudden we're not joining them in that. We're not living in that place anymore, and so they start. And sometimes we end up losing friends, and sometimes they come along for the ride. But the right use, the right thinking, again he uses that term right thinking or righteousness, that no outside persecutor but our own lower selves are the ones that are persecuting us. Every spiritual treatment or scientific prayer involves a tussle with our own lower self. So in Unity we talk about scientific prayer or spiritual treatment. Spiritual treatment, that's a new thought term. Don't hear it a lot in Unity, but scientific prayer. In other words, we put it to the test. We've tested this stuff. We know that prayer changes the prayer. And so we know that it doesn't necessarily change outer conditions. It doesn't change other people, places, and things, only to the extent that we change ourselves. So this is about changing ourselves. I wrote an article. It's on the website for the Clarkston News that went out this week. I wrote it on Monday, and it was published on Wednesday, and we know the election happened in between. And so basically I was, saying some of us are going to be happy, some of us are going to be sad, and most of us are going to be somewhere in between. And that we can't change other people, places, and things. We can't change the world. We can only change ourselves. And when we change ourselves, we have changed the world. That was my main point. How to change the world is the name of the article. How to change the world. And my main point was when we change ourselves, we have changed the world. Because we're part of the world. And as we change ourselves, we have an influence on other people around us. It may be hard at times. It may be difficult to maintain that positivity, to maintain that upbeat feeling, to maintain the consciousness of health and prosperity in the face of other people telling you that you're not healthy, you're not prosperous, you're not at peace. Well, I am. I choose to be, despite what you may think is going on. I may not, have the best of relationships, but I can be at peace in the midst of the relationship. All the great prophets and enlightened ones of the race who ultimately overcame did so just by struggles with themselves. Elijah in the cave for 40 days and 40 nights. He was struggling with himself. The earth, the wind, the fire, the earthquake, the wind, the fire, that was all an inner struggle. Jesus being tempted in the desert 40 days and 40 nights at the end of the Satan coming to him. That is that lower self, that ego self, that wants us to do magical things, turn these stones into bread, or to be exalted, to be raised up to the highest point, and have people praising us, or to test God and know that God is going to save us, and Jesus said, "Be gone, Satan," or "Get behind me, Satan." Mm-hmm. That temptation, we all have that temptation when we start realizing that we have some effect on our lives, that we have total control over what we think, say, and do. We may not be very good at it, but we get better with practice. And it's all about progress, not perfection. I have students, I often tell them that we have that old saying, practice makes, and people come up with perfect. I say no, practice makes progress. Perfect practice makes perfect, and since nobody's perfect, we're never going to be perfect, have perfect practice. But we can make progress. If we practice, we'll progress. That we will make progress. He goes on a little later and says, "For what you see at any time is nothing but your own concept." all that we see is nothing but our own concept. We choose how to respond to what we see. It's so obvious sometimes. Like, sometimes I'll tell the story about the young infant, that was crawling along the bookshelf, and there was an open window, and it crawled out the open window and fell 10 stories to its death. And everybody, I'm sure, is having some feelings about that. That happened about 30 years ago. It's not, we're not reacting to the event, but we're reacting to our own conception of that, how we hold that. And in unity, we often say that there is no death. It's just a door that we walk through. And so we know that individuals come for a reason. Sometimes they come for a reason, sometimes they come for a season, and sometimes they come for the duration. That there's been infants that have been on this planet for less than a week that have created healings within their family. We can go on and on. That's another topic that we can go down a long way. But to know that there is no death, that life, we cannot create or destroy life. It exists. Energy exists. We cannot create it or destroy it. We can only transform it. And so that's what we're in the process for ourselves, is transforming our own energies. Eric Butterworth, longtime Unity minister, talking about this particular passage, has a similar take on the whole thing. It says, whenever you set however, there's a deeper and more meaningful application of the Beatitude. The emphasis is on attitudes. It deals with our thinking. The persecution takes place within our own mind, and the persecutor is an errant thought of our own mind. So once again, this is a longtime Unity minister. This is a well-respected New Thought minister who could have become a Unity minister, but we didn't have a process for making New Thought ministers. We now have a field ministry process. He could have gone through that, but this is a longtime Unity minister talking about the same thing. That we're talking about what's the activities in the mind. That Jesus was a psychologist. Even though they didn't have that name back in those days, and his casting out of demons is getting rid of what we know of psychosis and schizophrenia and things like that. That's what they used to call demons. He goes on to say, whenever you set a course of righteousness or right thinking, when you begin a program of discipline and self-restraint, you will invariably run into the cross currents of your own static thoughts. Cross currents of your own static thoughts. One of the concepts I became aware of is Hegel's dialectic. For every thesis, there is the antithesis, right? So if I and you can see that, with politics, you got the right wing and the left wing, and they're batting heads, right? So, but in Hegel's dialectic, if we take the thesis and the antithesis and we reconcile them and bring them together, we create something greater, which they call synthesis. So then synthesis rises up to a different level. So that's the third force, if you will. You've got one force, the thesis. The second force was the antithesis. And then you have the synthesis, which is a third force, which is creating something greater than would have been going with either the thesis or the antithesis. We're always going to run into that. There's, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. That's the law of physics, which he gets into talking about the laws of physics. In this case, he talks about inertia. To move something that is still or to stop something that is in motion, you must overcome inertia. The inertial force holds a thing in rest or in motion until it is acted upon by an external force. So we have these laws of physics that work out in the physical world, and then we have the laws of metaphysics, which work on an inner level, world level. And so when we can look at the outer and see that as a reflection of what's going on in the inner and apply those ideas to what's going on within us as well. The Neil Douglas Klotz's another book that we've been looking at. He's an Aramaic scholar, and he looks at these words, again, with a blessing. He says, could be a blessing or health or alignment or tuned to the source. And the word persecuted could also mean driven, dominated, dislocated, disunited, or moved by scandal or shame. And that the base that we're looking at inner justice and stability. So he gives about a half dozen different possibilities for interpretation, and the one that I picked for the materials today is healing to those who have shattered within from seeking perfect rest. Holding them to life is heaven's eye can. So healing to those who have been shattered within. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for righteousness' sake. Shattered within. That the inertia of static thinking, of living, of the educational process that we've gone through family and friends and school and everything else, has created a static state. And when we start adding a certain amount of truth to that, then there's a certain amount of chaos, and in the midst of chaos is opportunity. There's a book by the name of Lessons in Truth by Emily Cady that talks about chemicalization. So when we add the acid of truth to the base of stuckness, if you will, of negative beliefs, etc., there's a reaction. We all know that volcano that we created back in science class, where you had a little baking powder and you put some vinegar in there, and that's chemicalization. So there's a little bit of that going on. Part of this, another way of understanding this idea of being persecuted for righteousness' sake. Now he goes on in the gospel, the parts that continue, and this is the 8th Beatitude, so we just keep going. He goes, blessed are you persecuted for righteousness' sake, blessed are those. So we had 8 statements that said, blessed are thee or those, and then we have a continuation of the 8th one that says, blessed are you when men revile you, etc., etc. For rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. Then he goes on to say, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Let your light so shine. So we're being called the salt of the earth and the light of the world. And Emmett, talking about these, it says, and in this wonderful passage, Jesus is addressing those who have awakened to the understanding of material bondage and have acquired some spiritual understanding of the nature of being. Such people he describes as being the salt of the earth and the light of the world, and indeed that is not too much to claim for those who understand the truth and who really live the life that corresponds to it. So we're awakening. We've come to the end of this, you might call it an 8-step process if you want to, but it's 8 levels of being, attitudes of being that lift us from being stuck. We had to go through that. Blessed are the poor in spirit. In other words, we had to stop being prideful of either being ignorant or overly smart, or being the chosen ones, or being the demonized one. Either whether we're greater than or less than, it's always the ego edging God out. And so we have to right-size ourselves. And that's, once we start this process, so we're started this process and we're working through this process to where we get to that consciousness of oneness, of unity, that we are lifted to a consciousness of light, the regeneration. So the salt, we are the salt, as I say, we are the salt of the earth. We are the salt of the earth, and then we are also the light of the world. The salt of the earth and the light of the world. So we're combining the physical elements with the spiritual elements. The light is shining, so let your light shine. And so we have that opportunity that as we grow, and we just hold on to the positive, we hold on to the affirmative, we express the growing constructive consciousness of the Spirit of God in all things that we do. Which brings me to our Hindu brothers and sisters, and the 8 limbs of Raja Yoga. And the 8 limbs of Raja Yoga really to me, correlate quite well with the 8 Beatitudes. And it ends, we go through this whole process. The first 5 are all about relaxing the mind and getting ourselves out of the way. It's got to do with giving up what we shouldn't be doing and do the things we should be doing, and about breathing properly, and about the proper posture to take, and our mental state that we get into. And then we start to get into concentration, meditation, and then absorption. So we're in the 8th limb, which is absorption, samadhi. And in this book, How to Know God, Swami Prabhavananda, who was a student of Vivekananda. Vivekananda was at the World Parliament Religions in 1893 when Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, the co-founders of Unity, went to the Parliament of World Religions, met Vivekananda, and had him come to Unity Village, and he wrote articles that turned into pamphlets that Unity published for a while. And so there's definitely a connection between Unity and Hinduism, or at least that the Raja Yoga. It says that when in meditation the true nature of the object shines forth, not distorted by the mind of the perceiver, that is absorption, or a samadhi. And this part about not distorted by the mind of the perceiver, that directly relates to what we were talking about here, that we see the world not as it is, but as we are. What were the words of, I think it was Fox here, for what you see at any time is nothing but your own concept. Very much it parallels this idea that we see that the mind, we don't see things as they are, but they're distorted by the mind of the perceiver. And once we get beyond that, then we enter into the samadhi. And there's a whole phase that goes along with that I think we'll talk a little bit more about next time in our 12th and last session on this particular series. We have been also looking at the Buddha's path and the eightfold Buddha's path, which again parallels. It's not exactly as close a correlation as the Hindu 8 limbs of Raja Yoga, but it shows that the divine 8 that comes forward, like the 8 Beatitudes. In Unity, we talk about the 7 as being physical completion, and the 8 lifts us up into the spiritual realms. Although 12 is spiritual completion, but this is leading towards the 12. It talks about right concentration is concentration which is wholesome. Right concentration is concentration which is wholesome. So we've gone through this whole process of establishing right understanding, right thinking, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and now we're talking about right concentration. So we're getting to that samyama, which is what we talked about, concentration, meditation, and absorption. That's the final 3 limbs of Raja Yoga, and this right concentration in the Buddhist tradition brings that all out. He goes on to say there is also right concentration in the development of direct understanding of realities. So getting past the appearances. I skipped this part. When calm is developed to the extent that absorption is attained, there's a high degree of concentration which focuses on the meditation subjects. There's no more sense impressions such as seeing or hearing, and defilements are temporarily subdued. There is also right concentration, development of direct understanding of reality. So right concentration, again, is to see beyond the appearances, beyond our mental constructs, the beliefs that we hold about things, but to actually see things as they are. And that's what we have coming through Buddhism and Hinduism, and that Unity has picked up a whole lot, quite a bit, and New Thought is to be here now. To now be here, to be with what is, and to get past the appearances of lack and limitation, the appearances of disease, and the appearances of conflict, to know the truth of God's health and wholeness, and peace and harmony and prosperity and abundance in the midst of everything. In this now moment, there's only God. But we spend most of our time in the past and in the future. There's a yogic practice that I do that if we can be in the moment with our pain, so a lot of people are in pain, in physical pain, and most of that pain has to do with a memory of what it felt like and a fear that it's going to last forever. So if we can let go of that and just be in the moment with it, it subsides. And the pain is, we can live with it, we can be with it. And that's the same with any pain that we might be going through, whether it be mental, emotional, or physical. That if we're with it in the moment, then we can transcend it and not be controlled by it.
It's like childbirth, I forget what they called it in the...
Yeah.
You had to do those breathing.
The breathing exercises that get you right into the moment and get you out of, oh, will this ever end kind of thing. Right, exactly. So next time we're going to be looking more at the whole process and also do a meditation that leads us through the process. So I'm looking forward to that.